Hi, welcome to Journey with Jess. I'm your host, Jessica Monge, and welcome to season 2. Thank you if you listened to season 1. If you haven't, it's great. I mean, I'm a little biased, but we had a lot of great conversations around mental health and how it's affected different range of people, men, mothers, etc. In honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, I'm focusing on Latinos and how their mental health was affected growing up. I think it's a very interesting topic, not only because I am Latina, but because in the States, mental health was already very taboo until very recently. Times that by about 10, and that was Latin culture. It is still very hard to talk about mental health, although walls are breaking down, and some parents are not just labeling mental health as for crazies, and they're actually being open about it. I'm just so much more excited to be a part of helping destigmatize mental health. And so today I'm interviewing Monica. She's from the Bay Area. She is Salvadoran American like myself. A very interesting tidbit is that she is the youngest of 3 and I am the oldest of 3. Birth order is very important also in your role growing up in a Latin household, or maybe any household, I don't know. Monica speaks about her experience growing up, boundaries, freedom, you know what I mean? Also about her experience as a teacher in the States and how that has affected her mental health. This one is a long one, but you're not going to want to miss a second of it. I mean, if you love Bulbasaur, I would just say hop onto YouTube and watch the video because her room is amazing. Anyways, without any further ado, thank you for listening to Journey with Jess. Today's guest is Monica.
So thank you for being on Journey with Jess. For the interview, do you mind stating your full name and telling us a little bit about you?
I'm Monica Mendoza. I am an elementary educator here in San Francisco Unified. I've been teaching for the last 7 years, going on 8, and have worked with kids in after-school programs since like 2009, 2010. I'm Salvadorian American, which is how I kind of stumbled upon your account on Instagram through my brother, who was just like, "Hey, check her out. look at this post."
Awesome. Shout out to your brother.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love meeting other Salvadoran Americans. And this podcast is actually episode's going to air around Hispanic Heritage Month.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So the point of this episode is to get to know more about your lived experience as, I don't know what you would define yourself, first gen, second gen, that's kind of like the debate going around and stuff.
Yeah.
But what would you describe yourself as?
I would say I am a first generation American because, at least as of states, in some of the courses that I took, we do talk about identity a lot. And so there is definitely that difference in discourse of like, at what age did your parents come? That might define them as being the first gen if they were younger versus like if they came already into their young adulthood or adulthood and then their children being first generation. But then I guess I truly define myself as first generation based on that, since my parents came when they were in their 20s, and my sister, who's the oldest of the 3 of us, was born here, and then the rest of us were born here as well. But yeah, so that's my opinion and my understanding of what defines first generation versus second generation.
Awesome. I completely agree with that. Honestly, it's difficult for some people and stuff. But I agree. It really depends on how old you came here. My cousin came here when she was 6, and I asked her, and she said, I consider myself first gen, and that's 100% valid too. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. Can you tell me a little bit about your family dynamic and how was navigating life with parents who are immigrants?
It's interesting. As I mentioned, I'm actually I don't think I mentioned this. I'm the 3rd of 3, so I'm the youngest. I'm the baby of the family, which comes with its own set of unique differences versus my siblings. So one of them being that I feel like for a longer period of time, my parents were more protective of me in comparison to my siblings. And in addition to that, I also saw them rebelling a little bit more earlier on, and there's a larger age gap between my siblings and I. So while we would be at these family parties with the other 20 cousins that live here in the US, the closest cousin or sibling was actually my brother, and he's already 4.5 years older than me. So imagine, a 5-year-old trying to hang out and play with 10 and up. Yeah. And they're often being like go over there, go hang out with mom, like go
Oh,
stay over there. Like, we don't want to watch Barney. We don't want to do the things that you want to do.
yeah.
Which, as an adult, I understand, but as a little kid, it's just kind of like, oh man, I can't play with my cousins or they don't want to play
Oh,
with me. So then I'm relegated to staying with the adults. And that also just added on to that dynamic of my mom being used to me being like right there, right by her side. And that it wasn't until I was older, like honestly, it wasn't until after high school that I started to push more. I was still living at home when I was doing my undergrad. And there would be things that would come up that would just feel so explosive as to why is there this level of distrust? Why is there this level of like worry that something's going to happen, that I felt was not present for my siblings. However, again, that age difference, maybe it was there, and I just wasn't as aware, because my sister is 11 years older than me, and my brother is, like I said, almost 5 years older than me. When I was dealing with these types of confrontations with my mom more so than my dad, I was maybe 20 by that point, and my sister at the time was by then 31.
wow.
and she had already moved. Like she was no longer in California, and when my sister was that age, when she was 21 or 22, I was 10. So
Yeah.
so like I don't think I was necessarily as aware of the types of conflicts that she was encountering, but once it was my turn, then I was just like, why is it so extreme? Why is it so much like we're so lenient with Michelle? Why were you so like okay with Jonathan? Why me? Why is it like so heavy? And I kind of skipped ahead to like the adulthood, but I do think like birth order kind of plays a big part into my experience with my parents and with immigrant parents. But definitely like even with language, I was legitimately bilingual as a baby. My parents were only speaking to me in Spanish, but it probably wasn't until preschool that, because I grew up in an area where most of the schools are English only. And the preschool I was at was definitely English only. It was at like the community college because they had like free childcare as long as your parents were taking classes. So I was in preschool from 2.5, 3 years old, and was already being exposed simultaneously to a lot more English, and then quickly picked that up. And then once I was elementary age and realizing like, oh, everybody just speaks English. I don't need to speak Spanish. So I think my rebellion actually started with language. Yeah, because then like once I started making those connections, at least socially at home, that's where my parents would still be like, responde en español, háblame en español, da, 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 da. And then I'd just be like, you understand English.
Oh.
No.
That's so funny that you bring up like birth order and stuff, because for me it was like very much opposite experience. I'm the oldest of three, and we all have big age gaps too. I'm like 6.5 years older than my middle brother Jose, and then the little one Angel, I'm 13 years older than him. So I always thought the opposite, like my parents are so much more lenient with my younger siblings. So I think that's very interesting. That's why I'm very excited to talk to you, because I want to know your perspective. But why do you feel like you wanted to rebel at such a young age?
As I mentioned, my parents came from El Salvador, and there's just such a level of like rigidity and strictness in the household of like trying to keep things clean, trying to, do everything the way that my parents wanted us to do it. And there would be clashes culturally, especially once I started to like have friends outside of the family, like friends that lived on my street, wanting to do a sleepover, and my parents being very confused of that idea of like, why would you want to sleep in a stranger's house? Why are you going to sleep on the floor? You have a bed. Like, and literally. You live on the same street. So what? Like, they're just like, that doesn't make any sense. And for me growing up over here and everybody else on my street being like, oh, I've had slumber parties since I was like 4. And or, you know, just like, why won't your parents do that? And
Yeah.
and I will mention, you know, on my street, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure I was the only Latina that was around my age, because there were definitely a couple other Latino families that were on my street, but they were just significantly older, so I didn't really, you know, roll with them the same way that I was rolling with like the other kids on my street. We could totally be the cover of a brochure, of a diversity brochure, from my from my from my street, but you know, like everybody else, like nobody else spoke Spanish, nobody else was dealing with that same level of like challenge. And if I'm not mistaken, except for maybe one other kid, I think everybody else also had one white American parent as well.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, because now that I think about it, like the next door neighbor, she was Filipino and white. The person down the street was white. The other person who was like on the opposite side of the street, I want to say she was maybe Hawaiian and white, but also maybe like a mix of a couple other Asian. But yeah, so I think like each of them had at the very least one parent who saw something like sleepovers as, you know, that's normal. It's part of kid, you know, childhood, whatever.
Yeah.
Versus my parents being like, that's so strange. like
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense. I think in that aspect, like that might have been some of the first ways, language wise and socially, how I was just like, why are you guys making this so difficult? And why, like, as a little kid, I would be pushing back, like, no, that's not how it's done. Like,
Yeah.
that's normal. Everybody else is doing it. Or, you know, why are you forcing me to speak in Spanish? Which the irony, by the way, is I am a dual immersion Spanish English teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I teach a lot of kids that are like myself that also are just like, Spanish is so hard, or like, but why? And I'm like, you don't understand. You're gonna really appreciate this later in life. But yeah, so I think a lot of that just has a lot to do with that. Like those were kind of the first ways that I saw that I was just like, what do you mean this isn't clicking? It's all over TV too.
You would also assume that they went through that same thing with your older siblings. Like, did they never ask for sleepovers and stuff? Or an example of that?
I am not 100% sure. I want to say my sister for sure had some slumber parties or sleepovers, but maybe she didn't ask until she was older, because when my parents first moved to the US, they were in San Francisco. It wasn't until my sister was, I think, 6 or 7 that they moved out to the suburbs. At that age is when I was asking to have a sleepover. Was like 6 or 7, talking to my neighbors and stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, let's go ask your mom. And I don't think my sister was asking to do those things until maybe middle school, because she was making friends, you know, a little bit older, versus me like growing up and already being there with the kids on the same street. Yeah. And then as for my brother, I think there's also, you know, the whole penis privilege type thing that like, they just don't have to worry about him being pregnant. You know, let's not think about the fact that a guy can get somebody pregnant, but you can't get pregnant. So be free.
Really, really unfair. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where it starts. And also just like the media I was consuming. I mean, I'm a 90s kid through and through. And so think about all those like Mary-Kate and Ashley movies that are all like, let's have a sleepover, or like, give me pizza, P-I-Z-Z-A. And I'm like, see, that's normal. I should be singing Give Me Pizza with my next door neighbor.
So not to backtrack too much, but why did your parents come to America?
For my mom, I've actually been very curious about that lately, or just like as I've gotten older, I'm like trying to get more information out of them. They left in 79. So like right when all of the Civil War unrest was really starting to amp up. However, it was interesting that I recently learned for my dad, that was actually never his plan to come to the US. However, for my mom, despite or whether there was going to be a civil war or not, that was always her plan, was to come to the US. And, you know, going back to birth order, my mom is number 8 out of 9 siblings.
Oh my gosh.
Of her 9 siblings, 7 moved to the US plus her. So only one sibling actually stayed in El Salvador. So for her, and I want to say at that time, by then, I think she, my tío who's younger than her, and my tío who is the eldest of the family, I think they were the three that were still in El Salvador. So by that point, she already had 6 siblings that were already in the US.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think just from her perspective and from what she saw with her siblings, it's just like that's where we have more economic opportunity. She was seeing by example that her siblings were able to make it and like have families and whatnot. And she comes with a level of privilege as well. Like or both my parents do, because they both came to the US on a plane versus like having to cross walking or undocumented and things like that. So I don't take that for granted that even within that story of like coming from El Salvador, coming during like the war, like my family's coming with a level of privilege that not everyone necessarily has, especially during that wave, because during that time from the 80s on, there was a huge immigration wave from El Salvador escaping the war. And so I think as far as like with my parents, my mom that was always going to be part of the plan, because she saw what was going on with her siblings and that like, we can do this. And she also had privilege of like having come to the US to stay with one of her siblings and take English classes. She was already bilingual. She already had the language. That wasn't going to be a barrier for her. If anything, that was going to be an asset to come in being like, I'm bilingual. I have this experience working in these settings, not to take away any difficulties that she did have once she did come to the US. And then for my dad, it was more like, well, he loved her.
Oh, that's so cute.
And he was like, they had already gotten married in El Salvador. And he's like, well, I'm not going to leave my wife. I mean, obviously, my dad saw, okay, yeah, there are opportunities and might as well leave right now that things are getting bad. But they both have made it pretty clear that like the initial move to the US wasn't necessarily immediately tied with the Civil War, but they definitely knew a lot of people that died out there during that time. And especially my mom, like she had a lot of friends involved in the church. She was well aware of like the people that got massacred with El Señor Romero. Those were their motivators to get to the US. And then here we are.
That's a unique story. I've never really heard of that before. The ones like I mainly hear, at least where I live in Long Island in Hempstead, are because of the war. Like they knew someone or because they were recruited, and as soon as they were done, they came here and stuff like that. So I think it's nice to have a happy story, In terms of like your parents, did they ever feel like survivor's guilt because of their friends back home?
I don't think I've ever explicitly asked them that. There might be, but I don't know that they would really necessarily talk about it. To talk about my dad for a little bit, I've talked to him about mental health and things, because like I've dealt with mental health issues before, and and especially after finally like going to therapy, saw the benefits of it, and then also just thinking like, damn, everybody should go to therapy. And when I've talked to my dad about things like that, like in a more general sense, he's kind of just like, para qué? Like, what am I gonna gain out of like my feelings? Like, what?
So much.
And I try to explain that to him that like, oh no, like it's really good. It helps with like processing things or thinking about how you react to stuff. And my dad's just like, but that's in the past. Maybe I will end up asking them something in that line in the near future, because I do feel like for the time period that my parents are from, like the 50s, they were both born in the 50s. Like, don't want to give out my mom's age, but I'll just leave it at that, in the 50s. I know she'll be mad.
Watch her hear this.
I know it'll somehow get to her. And but at any rate, like take that into consideration too. Like both of them being born in the 50s, growing up in the 60s and 70s in a very conservative country, that when I was going through my own mental health issues, my mom's reaction was just like, but you're not crazy. You're not.
Yep, that's the one.
You're not hearing voices. Like, why would you go to therapy? Like, what do you need to do? I feel like there probably is some level of survivor's guilt, whether they will like explicitly say that or if they've even processed through that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's why I bring in that whole aspect of my dad just being like, what's the point of talking about your feelings?
Yeah.
What am I gonna gain? So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, okay, let's open up this box from a very tumultuous time in your home country, you know, and especially I think about it a little bit more so for my dad, because like I said, my mom, she had a network here, like she had her family here, a lot of her family, and eventually that younger brother of hers who was like who's number 9 out of the siblings, he also came to the US too. And so like I grew up with mostly my mom's side of the family. My dad's side, however, they were more split up in different parts of the world too. Like I have an uncle in Australia.
Oh,
For
wow.
a long time, I still had family in El Salvador on his side, but then they're just kind of in different parts in different areas. And so I am pretty curious as to like how that was emotionally and mentally for my dad. And he also didn't have that same advantage that my mom had of being bilingual already. Like he came and had to start working at a gas station when he came to the US, whereas my mom was able to like apply for clerical stuff, like a secretary. And how they both feel, especially since like my mom does know people who were like rebels in that whole conflict.
Oh, wow.
And people who ended up having to like seek asylum in Sweden. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it's I'm really curious, but also just like their own upbringings and experiences, I think will lead to very different different feelings about that conflict, and also how many people they knew on either side.
Yeah. But, would you say your dad probably knew more people since most of his family was still there?
I think so, and I think also since my dad is younger, I think like people in his age group were also, not that they're that much of an age difference either, but you know, like they were picking up kids that were like in high school or even younger to pick a side. And that part I do know, like that he knows of friends who were like contacted or forced to choose.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad also went through the same thing when he was 16. He went out to go for a walk or whatever, and he got picked up from like, I think it was the government's army, and they're like, you have to fight. And he had no choice, and he was 16. So I totally get that. It's a traumatic thing too, because like my grandmother was like, I already have one son in the army. Please don't take my youngest son. And they don't care, they didn't care at the time. They just needed soldiers. It was definitely a hard time for a lot of people, but to bring it back here to growing up in the States, how was your relationship with your parents? Did you guys have more conflict beyond the summer parties and stuff?
Yeah, so it's I'd say I have a very healthy relationship with my dad. It's very easy to talk to my dad. And despite him being like, what's the point of feelings? I think he's more receptive.
Yeah.
He's more receptive to like my wanting to like express myself. I mean, I even wear a sweater that says I'm sensitive, and my dad and I joke with my dad. I'm like, I should get you one too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cute.
But yeah, no, and even going back to like I think middle school, I entered some poetry in a county fair contest type thing, and I entered in a couple other categories as well. So the day that we were checking out the results, I went with my mom when we were checking out the results, and I showed her like the chirimol that I entered as salsa.
Oh.
And then like the cookies I had baked for the baking contest. But I didn't show her the poem that I submitted because it was really personal. It was like titled Crush, and it's about like experiencing those feelings of like having a crush on someone and like not knowing if they like you, or then hearing from your classmates that maybe they do, and then you find out that they like somebody else or whatever. But it was like, all up in my feels.
Yeah.
All up in my feels, but also just like that acknowledgement that I am starting to have those feelings. I felt very nervous to show my mom. And
Mm.
that's why I showed my mom those other things. I was like, oh, look, like,
Yeah.
for salsa. Ah, my cookies didn't do so well. Oh, well. And and I had also submitted some photography. And that was during the fair. And then to like pick everything up, you had to come after the fair was over. So it was a different day. And I went with my dad to go pick up the other things. But with my dad, I was just like, oh, I also got a second place ribbon for this poem I wrote, and I was like, can I read it to you?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, my dad was just like, oh wow, like that's really nice. And wow, I don't know why I'm crying right now.
Oh, it's okay.
um should have worn the I'm sensitive sweater. I yeah, I think I need my own that says I cry easily.
Oh,
For everything.
that'd be a great shirt to have. I would buy it. Do you think that you weren't able to show it to your mom? Do you feel like she was emotionally unavailable or like just a little harder?
I think it's just harder in general for my mom to accept that I was growing up.
Okay.
And so that's why I was saying, like, thinking back about the whole party thing, right?
Mhm.
All this time I'm relegated to just like staying by her side, having to stay with all the tias and tios or whatever. And from her perspective, she's saying like, oh, I'm very like my youngest daughter is very much attached to me, is by my side. And then as I get older and starting with the social part of like pushing back with the language, I feel like she has tried to control in a way that like early on it didn't necessarily seem all that harsh, but like as I got older, that feeling from my end of her wanting to decide like what I do, where I go, and whatever, I think part of it is her trying to like hold on to me as like a small
baby.
child.
Yeah.
A baby, yeah. The idea of me dating or the idea of me even having a crush, I think was already just like too much. In like, I think I was already able to recognize that at like 12 years old, 13, whatever, however old I was in middle school. I was on the younger side. Now that I think about it, probably like 11 or 12. I feel like my mom was not as accepting of me growing up, whereas my dad, like, I was just like, let me test it out. And I'm like, okay, my dad's okay with it.
Oh, did you ever try to test it out with your mom?
Kind of. It was received in a very like standoffish way, or just not willing to accept that I am growing up. Because so let's move past middle school. In high school, I think I started to like kind of just be like, yo, I like people. When can I date? Because my mom, I think I might have asked in middle school, kind of out of curiosity. Not that there were really that many opportunities for me to date anybody in middle school. But but in high school, I just was like, no, I like people and people like me or whatever. And also out of respect, and this is where I'm like, damn, I should have pushed back earlier more so. Because I was always like asking for permission versus like, what's the saying? Like, it's better to ask for forgiveness than
I know you mean. I just can't think of it.
Yeah, I'm stumbling on that part. But essentially, I was more focused on always asking for permission when it came to my mom, rather than like just do it and then ask for forgiveness afterwards. So with like dating, I brought it up to her, just being like, so when can I date? Like, when can I have a boyfriend or whatever? And my mom, like, I guess from middle school into high school, was like, not until after your quinceañera. And I was just like, all right, bet.
You're like, that's doable. Watch me.
Yeah. So like, she doesn't know, but I did have a boyfriend in my freshman year, and I turned 15 in my sophomore year. And so after my quinceañera, I was just like, I have a boyfriend. Here he is.
Did you have him in your court or no?
No, and I didn't have a court. It was just
okay.
Both my siblings also were just like, it's easier to just manage if it's just you.
Okay.
My sister had the full court, and my brother had participated in many quinceañeras.
Yeah.
And so they both were just like, do you really want to have, do you want to put that on mom and dad? They're going to have to buy pizza so much for so many kids.
Oh, that's true. It is a hassle. It was, yeah.
Did you have a quinceañera?
I did, and I had the 14 couples, and it was just so much. But it also because I had so many cousins, and I was like, I don't want just my family in my quinceañera. But that's why I decided, and they were right. They were right.
Yeah, although and it wasn't until like the party had already gone into motion and stuff, or the party planning. A number of my friends who were also Latinas and like everybody else was starting to have quinceañeras or at least turn 15. Some of their families were like opting for either the party or a car, a trip of your choice.
I've heard of that one, yeah.
And then when I started hearing that from some of my other friends, I was just like, we're spending a lot of money for just one day.
Mm-hmm.
Those other options.
These sound really great.
They sound really great. Yeah, hindsight's 2020.
Honestly, I would have done one of those things if I was presented the option, but I was the only girl, so I was like, no.
Yeah. And I was the last one out of all my cousins on my mom's
Oh wow.
side. Yeah. Because I'm number 24 out of the 24 cousins on my mom's side. And that's just
a lot of cousins.
And that's just counting the ones that were like from the same mom and dad.
Wow.
I jokingly tend to be like, yeah, I think I'm related to about a third of the country back home. But jokingly, not joking, apparently my grandfather on my mom's side had a lot of
out of
wedlock. So
it's hard to date Salvadorans in general because I feel like that was such a big thing for like our grandparents and our great grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Like my great grandmother had like 10 kids with like different baby daddies, and I'm just like, oh, it's not safe to at least date in like the canton or the department at all. So I totally get that.
Yeah. So I just feel like it's been hard for my mom to accept that I'm growing up. And so
how was it when you told her about your boyfriend?
She was kind of like shocked and was just like, where did this kid come from? And I was like, he was at my party.
So ballsy.
I also, looking back on it, I kind of feel bad that I made him do this, but like I made him come to church with me because my mom and dad are like very much into Catholicism and being Catholic and whatnot. And I was like, it'll look good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Come with me to church.
Yeah.
My mom will appreciate that.
Oh, yeah.
And so like it was cool. Like they gave him a nickname based on an appearance and I'm like, that was messed up.
Yeah, they always do that. It's really messed up.
It's really messed up, but then it's just like their way of talking about him in code and it's like, that's not very coded, but okay.
It's always the most obvious thing, or like just the opposite, the complete opposite. Like, no, we know who you're talking about.
Yeah. But at any rate, like it didn't take too long for my mom to like warm up to him, and it did help that he liked to talk. And so, because I've had other boyfriends that were just like more shy and just more on the quiet side, and my mom very openly would be like, "No me cae bien."
Oh man,
I don't like him. He doesn't say hello. He doesn't say goodbye. And I'll be like, okay, I agree. He should come in and say hello to you.
Yeah.
But
he's just painfully shy. Like he doesn't mean to be rude.
Yeah. He doesn't mean to be rude, but definitely have seen different reactions to different boyfriends with my mom in particular. Do I like him? Does he talk enough? Does he?
Yeah.
Whereas again, my dad is more just like,
he sounds so laid back and chill, like unbothered, and I'm like, I wanna achieve that level of unbothered.
He really is, like, because the things that he'll say to me, he'll just be like, mira, vamos a ver, just like, don't do anything stupid, that's it, that's all. That is so my simple. That is my only advice to you, is don't be stupid, that's it. And I just love how like, you're right.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Oh man. So with your mom, did you ever try to set boundaries with her and like growing up?
Like I said, I did not really set boundaries until after high school.
Mm.
Which again, I think like kind of like bit me in the ass later on once I finally did start to push back. From high school, I went to a community college for 2 years, and then I was going to transfer into a 4-year after that. That in and of itself was like kind of an issue that like my mom was not understanding of. She was kind of just like, why aren't you just going to go straight into a 4-year? And unfortunately, for the timing of it all, when I was in high school, I was also in this tech academy. And so we did a lot of projects with multimedia. The reason why I bring that up, and we also did other stuff with computers and whatever. But the reason why I bring that up is up till 2008, those classes did not count as any kind of art. So for my high school transcripts on paper, I was actually missing an art requirement that I needed to get into pretty much any 4-year university. So even though I feel like I had a really great education and had a great time and learned a lot of cool skills with like Photoshop, all the Adobe platforms, we did a lot of movie editing and just like film is art, Photoshop is art, like photography, 3D design. We did all kinds of stuff that like, unfortunately, it didn't count. Like
That's crazy.
It was not seen as art, which like present day, it's like, are you kidding me? Everything is done on a goddamn computer. Anyway, I'm not bitter about that. Not at all. But because of that, I kind of had to go to a community college first. And so in the end, it was like, whatever, because we were saving money on my tuition. I didn't qualify for any kind of financial aid, which was funny too for my parents, because they're like, this is ridiculous. Like, we don't make that much money. Why don't we qualify? And I mean, the same thing comes up right now for me. I've been applying for like a below market rate apartment, and I'm just like, I am a public school teacher. How do I not qualify?
That's crazy.
And it's just because everything is based off of, before taxes. And so before taxes, everybody's making way more money.
After taxes, not so much.
Not so much. So at any rate, like my parents were able to save a lot of money for my tuition, being that I was getting the same type of education with my general courses for those first 2 years, and then transferring to SF State afterwards. But I commuted to school. I didn't learn until later on that that's just like a very American thing to commute to go to your university, and also very much like very common for the Bay Area, because so many people commute from like Pittsburgh to San Francisco, Concord to San Francisco, Walnut Creek to San Francisco, whatever. So it's just like the norm.
Okay.
And I bring this up because I also saw my sister do that. She commuted to school when she went to SF State. She didn't move out into the dorms or anything like that. My brother, he did move out, but he was going further. He went to UC Davis. So that was maybe twice the distance for where we were to San Francisco. And I did that commute as well. And I was just like, yeah, this is normal. While I was at SF State, I also was like, oh, I really want to do a study abroad program. Both of my siblings had done study abroad programs, but they did summer programs that were shorter for like 3 weeks, maybe a month. I was like, well, we saved this much money. Please allow me to show you my PowerPoint presentation on why I should go for a semester.
Oh, man.
And to the other side of the planet.
Oh no, your mom. I can only imagine.
Because I saved you thousands of dollars by going to the community college. It will actually equate to the same cost had I been at SF State the entire time for a 4-year education, for me to do 1 semester in the lovely foreign place of Sweden.
Oh my gosh. Oh, what did your mom say?
Oh my God. It was a battle.
Oh no.
Because like my mom was just like, well, that's a lot of money or whatever, but honestly, like it really did equate out. It equaled out to what would have been spent on my tuition had I gone to San Francisco State from the beginning. I think maybe in total it might have been around $9,000 for the semester abroad. And I want to say it was something like 3,000 was my tuition, another 3,000 was essentially housing, and then the other three was like cost of living types of stuff, plus the airfare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so more or less, I mean, state colleges, they're not the most expensive versus UC, and obviously way more affordable than a private university. Made my case, laid it out, and I knew she already had her own parameters of like, oh, but like you better be taking classes that are actually related to your major, so that way you're not wasting a semester over there. And I was like, already did that. Check.
You're like, I know your rebuttals, Mom. Like,
yeah. I know the way you argue. I know the way you think. I know what you're gonna think of to try to convince me otherwise, or to be like, no, we can't. It's not possible. It's not in the cards. And I'm like, no.
It is.
It is.
So did you go? Did she say yes?
I did. I did go. Yeah, and it was amazing. It was the best 6 months of my life, especially like the college aspect of it. And so this is where why I brought up the whole thing about commuting and it being just such a normal thing, very uniquely, maybe even just the Bay Area, I'm not sure, to be like, oh, a 2-hour commute to my school and a 2-hour commute back home is normal. Everybody that I met when I was studying abroad was just like, are you kidding me? Like, why in the world are you commuting so much time? Like that takes away from you being able to study, that takes away from you being able to like participate at like school related events. It takes away from you like from like connection. And while I was in Sweden, obviously like I'm 9 hours ahead of my parents. I'm like 6,000 miles away from home. I'm doing whatever the hell I want, whenever the hell I want. And and then even just like the checking in type of thing of like, oh, can you Skype with us? Because this was before Zoom took over. It was like the default video calling app. And then just being able to be like, oh, it's actually kind of hard for me to check in with you guys. It's that 9-hour difference.
Yeah.
You know? And so I really got that sense of freedom when I was over there. I was just so happy.
I get that. Yeah.
I wasn't aware of how much all these other things, all these other factors were weighing on me when I was at home until I didn't have that on me when I was in Sweden.
Yeah.
And then also just seeing the benefits of living on campus, or even just in general, like making it a little more broad of like living close to where you work. Like I live in San Francisco and I work in San Francisco. When I went back to school to do my teaching credential, I told my parents, I was just like, I don't care how, I don't care in what kind of living conditions I'm going to be in, but I am not doing that commute from your house while I'm at SF State again, but this time for my teaching credential. It was too much. The curtain had been removed and I could no longer go back to being like, oh, this is just normal.
Yeah.
Like, this is just how it is. This is just how it is for everyone. And I get it. Like I could go back to my parents' house and commute to my work or whatever and pay less in rent. But all the memes on TikTok and Reels are so right when they say like, yeah, you save money, you just pay for it in your mental health.
Literally, that's literally what I've been preaching so hard like lately, because that's the argument with a whole bunch of people. And like, everybody's situation is different. Everybody's circumstance is different, but it's like, you don't understand how great your mental health is after you move out. It doesn't matter how much you're paying, but even if you're in a room by yourself, like your mental health will skyrocket. It'll be so much better.
Yeah. And so unfortunately, the like downside of this whole experience in Sweden and 6 months of doing whatever, living on campus, being able to bike everywhere, being able to bus wherever I want to, being able to just hop on a train and go on a little adventure with classmates, and also just like establishing those social networks. When I came back, because this was still for undergrad, right? When I came back, I kind of started to realize, oh, wow, I really am missing out on a lot with even just the socializing aspect. Because when I transferred in, I was transferring in to do all these like teacher prep related courses. I was a liberal arts major, It's like liberal arts with an emphasis in elementary education teacher prep. But really, I just walk away with a liberal arts degree.
Oh, okay.
In California, it's not, or at least at state schools, it's not like a bachelor's in teaching or a bachelor's in education. All the courses that I was taking that were more elementary ed focused, I was making a lot of connections and making a lot of like classmate friends who would invite me to be like, oh, hey, like let's go get a beer after class, or oh, we're doing this thing. Do you want to study with us, or whatever? And I would always be stuck having to say no, because if I drove into the city that day, I'm like, no, I can't, because I don't want to drink and drive. If I took the train into school, I'd be like, no, I can't, because I'd be stuck out here. I'd miss my train to go back home. And even as a grown-ass adult, back to those sleepovers, circling back, even as a grown-ass adult, and you know, prior to me going to Sweden, my mom was not in favor of me like staying over at a friend's dorm, apartment, whatever house situation that my classmates were in at that time. Just because like there's a level of distrust and discomfort of like what might happen to you. But at that point, you know, as an adult, I'm just kind of like, ugh, do you not think that I can't like tell somebody no? Or do you really think that like that's the unfortunate side, is like, I know my mom is never explicitly ever saying any of these things. That's just how I am interpreting it. But it's really unfortunate that that's the message that is being received. It's not the intent, but that's the impact. That I'm like, you don't trust me. You think that I am so naive or so incompetent to stop someone from doing something, or that you think I'm going to make such stupid decisions. And I think that's where like a bigger wedge really started to get bigger and bigger, because obviously like as I'm growing and getting older and maturing, I'm just really starting to question like, why do you feel so uneasy at the thought of me being independent? That not only causes you fear, but then also like causes you to say things that end up sounding like you don't think I can make a decent choice. That's why I prefer the way my dad says, like, just don't do anything stupid. I'm like,
gotcha.
It's so simple and so like, duh. Like, you use common sense type of stuff. But then with my mom, it's just, why can't you just tell me that? Just honestly, I would be way happier if you would tell me, just don't do anything stupid.
Did your mom ever say the phrase, I trust you, I just don't trust other people?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
And how did you feel about that? Reflecting on that, what do you think?
I don't think she even trusted me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's different. Yeah, I feel like as an adult, I totally believe that phrase now. When I was younger, I was like, man, like whatever, like you just don't trust me. But I feel like, I guess it's the stuff in the news where I'm like, yeah, I really don't trust other people. And like in New York City, like we've had such a like bad homelessness problem, or just people who like, I guess have untreated mental health, where like they really are attacking random people and like just stabbing, throwing them on the subway tracks. Like it is like the worst case scenario sometimes, but that's why I go back to think of.
I think she probably did say that stuff when I was younger, but I don't think she necessarily was saying that anymore once I was older and in college. And oddly enough, that you mentioned the whole thing of like the people that are untreated with mental health issues and whatnot. Like I said, I live in San Francisco, so similar things happen here. But one of the things that she tried to like argue as far as like why I shouldn't go to Sweden was just like, but you're going to be by yourself. And I was like, Sweden's one of the safest countries in the world. You know, like I am going to be safer over there than I am over here. After doing study abroad, I have gone on solo trips in other countries and stuff. And almost every time that same thing comes up of like, but you're going to be by yourself. And I'm like, Mom, I am more likely to be stabbed or shot here in the US than I am in a lot of these other countries. Like honestly, which is an unfortunate thing, you know, going back to the whole like our parents leaving a war-torn country for like safety or, you know, economic opportunity and whatnot, and then here we are, their children being like, yeah, it's dangerous. I don't know, somebody might drug me in a bar, somebody might attack me on the trains. I've been harassed so many times on the bus, and it's just like, honestly, I never had to deal with that stuff when I was in Sweden, Japan, Korea, even Cuba. Felt like Cuba was probably the safest Caribbean country that I've ever visited.
But you're right, like it's sad. Like they came from a country where like it was civil war starting, and then they come here where like what they came like beginning of the 80s, where like the drug epidemic was happening and like all that stuff. And it like drugs are not as bad, but they're still bad here, you know?
Mhm.
So I feel like they haven't really gotten a break, like our parents in general, in terms of like us, the way we live in the United States. Now that mass shootings are a big thing. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's always a high stress situation, like 9/11, COVID, this, like, you know?
Yeah. No, and the thing about mass shootings too, like there was even a struggle with my mom about me being an educator, not because of mass shootings, but because of just like low pay. And while I was in Sweden was when Sandy Hook happened. I remember talking to my parents just being like, I didn't get into a profession where I thought I would have to like be fearful of my life and my safety, working with elementary school kids. And also like the added pressure now to be like, oh, I'm going to give my life.
Yeah.
I will put myself in front of these children. I will die for them type of thing. Like,
Yeah.
Like what kind of backward ass developed country do we live in where that's the expectation for elementary teachers?
Yeah. A lot of people say the United States are they're a third world country in disguise. Let's talk about that, right? Like how is your mental health as a teacher?
Thank you for listening to my first episode of Journey with Jess season 2. Now, I know we all want to know how Monica's mental health is as a teacher in the States. So tune in next week, same time for part 2. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the conversation. Thank you for listening. And don't forget to give a 5-star rating for the podcast, or if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. It means the world to me and I appreciate your help so much. Thank you for listening.